Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org here in wider Kalamazoo. As always, following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR or Western Michigan University. Um, So I want to apologize first for not uploading last week's episode online. If you were listening, it got cut short. Um, as it turned out, my mother was in the hospital. She'd had a heart attack, and she passed a week ago today at about 9:30 p.m. Um, I was kind of on the fence about whether to come in today. And, again, it's perfect excuse to have like a bereavement episode or a non-episode due to bereavement. And I eventually decided I at least wanted to come in and give the news and some updates as I usually do. And um, I did want to spend I had a couple thoughts after, again, this really tragic thing that's been roiling me and my family and a lot of people in the community, a lot more than I really anticipated. But I want to talk about my mom a little bit. And, those of you who've known me in the community for a long time, especially around 2016, maybe late 2015, I was really starting to get a lot more active. I'd been kind of an artist before that. Some of you from way back in the day may remember the political rap stylings of Systemista. Um, but I've often thought, I didn't really come from, an activist family, and to the extent that like my folks did stuff, it wouldn't be the typical things that you'd associate with like, oh, they were really active with the local church or a local community organization. My mom started her own. I will talk about that in a sec, but um, people have often asked me where I get kind of that streak from, and you know, I think the kind of the moral backbone, the innate uh sense to rail against injustice, or at least stand up for what's right. I get a lot of that from my dad. My capacity to call the BS that squarely comes from my mom and her incomparable sass and again her own capacity to call out BS wherever they see it. Every crumb of wit and presence and the fact that I could come onto this radio program week after week with a modicum of charisma, that's all my mom's fault. So I guess if you don't like my politics, you can blame her. Not much you can really do about it right now, but there it is. Um, and I have to hand it to my mom. A lot of folks' parents, and a lot of college students may be listening, and you may run into those issues where your politics start to diverge from your parents. It could create really huge schism, and also with identity issues for my queer comrades who have to face being disowned possibly. And when I began uh, about 10 years ago, when I was a drag artist running around Kalamazoo, my mom was very accepting of that, and she honestly thought it was the most fun thing in the world. This is somebody who grew up on David Bowie, so it wasn't too far afield that her son could carry on um, that sort of gender bending tradition, and also got my dad to accept a lot of things that I think his more kind of um, what's the word I'm looking for? Traditional outlook may otherwise not have. She is the one who introduced me to weird art, which was also a pipeline into underground politics. I owe so much of that to her. In her own right, my mom spent the last 20 years or so of her life being a prolific community organizer. in the sense that, there's a pejorative term that gets thrown around, a keyboard warrior. My mom actually was one in the most sincere sense. She started this Facebook group called Sisterhood of the Autism Mothers, and what began as just a way for her and a few people she know to kind of vent turned into a international support group with thousands of people. Um, in the days after my mom's passing, one of the most comforting things was just going on Facebook and just seeing dozens and dozens of people I had never met in my life, just speaking testimony to this incredible woman who, you know, individuals who, their children have just been diagnosed with autism. They don't know what that means or where to go. And my mom would hit them up with a private message in the middle of the night and be like, "We are here for you." That sense of empathy is what I try to carry with me every day, whether it's through organizing or I'm at work or just I'm out about the community. Is always try to, understand other people are going through it and how can we help? And I get that from my mom. Um, there's some other things that have come to mind in this last week that again feels very surreal to my mom lived to 69, and yes, you can say it, nice. It's never too early. It's never too what's the word? It's always too soon to lose a parent. I'm 37. Mom was approaching 70. Her birthday was going to be next month. It's still been very, very difficult. Of course, and I know y'all were waiting for it. When's Andy gonna slide the analysis in here? Yes, living under capitalism has made that all the much more difficult. Me and my grieving family, we have had to navigate the joy of figuring out how much the cremation is going to cost and trying to navigate life insurance, which, by the way, I contacted my mother's life insurance companies on Friday. I have not gotten so much as an email back from them yet. I do not know what that process is going to look like, but if I could guess, it's going to be bureaucratic and it will probably take a very long time. And it's not just, money that we would like to have. It's money that's really necessary for, funeral expenses. We don't know what's going to happen. My father, they lived on a two-person income in the house they're currently residing at. Um, basically, everybody in my family has had to dip into their rainy day fund in order to make sure this very necessary stuff is done with my mother's remains. This isn't really something that grieving families should have to think about when they lose a loved one. And I think this is one of the most surreal things. This was either the day after, or maybe the 2 days after they passed, was going online and get a quote today. Get a quote today for how to deal with your mom's dead corpse. Seeing the same language used to sell me car insurance to try to pitch me on how to affordably deal with my mother's remains or get the super deluxe extra package. It was a pretty stark reminder of kind of the extra insults we have to deal with when everything is structured for profits in the society that we live in. Um, we don't know yet. If you knew my mother, we don't really know the details yet of where that service is going to be. We are shooting for November 16th. That is her birthday. Before this sudden event happened, she wanted a big birthday party for her 70th. So I think we're going to move forward with that. We do not know where we're going to do it yet. There's a couple of places. Um, I'm hesitant to pick a spot that isn't. I'm concerned about it being too small. I don't know how many people are going to want to show up. She had this big circle of people. Apparently, again, this autism support group of people from all over the world. I don't know how many of those people are going to show up, and it's just all of this stuff is going through my head. But it is going to be the 16th. Details will be TBA. Um, for everybody who's listening, who did know my mom, she would want you to celebrate her life. And God, was she was a funny, funny woman. Um, and again, I loved her sense of cutting through nonsense. We'd be watching the news together, and just like he is full of crap. Yeah, that politician is full. And she described to me why. And she's never like a full blown Marxist like her son, but she was able to break things down in her own really funny and cynical way. Um, so uh, I don't think I have too much else to say um, regarding that. Mom, rest in power, and everybody you inspired, from everyone you inspired. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I am going to be talking about the auspicious anniversary we just looked at, we just had October 7th. We're going to be spending much of the rest of the hour covering that. Um, when and We will also be looking at some other stories related to, again, the media coverage of it, as well as hurricanes and some news coming out of University of Michigan. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your source for political revolution. Hello, everybody. We are back. This is Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Well, I did want to pivot now. This is a little bit of good news. If you've been following the labor negotiations going on here at the university, you would know that the American Association of University Professors has been in some bad faith negotiations with the university, but it sounds like they have finally reached a tentative agreement. This is as of October 3rd. From Chief Negotiator Andrew Henlich and President Catherine Bailey, who, as you may recall, we interviewed same day as Bronco Bash. After a grueling fight extending a month beyond the negotiation deadline, the WMU AAUP Executive Committee has approved a complete tentative agreement on the 2024 through 26 contract reopener of Articles 32 and 33. Critical details have been provided directly to members to help prepare for an upcoming ratification vote. While the WMU AAUP did not get everything proposed, the overall results are very good. It is evident that members' powerful demonstrations of solidarity have had impacts both on these negotiations and, we anticipate, on future negotiations and WMU labor dynamics in general. The fact that our entire contract, including both of these articles, will be up for renegotiation in less than 2 years from now may serve as helpful context as you consider where we've landed now. For additional context about the unusual nature of the fight we've been engaged in during this incredibly challenging wage reopener, please see the post linked here, and that was separately sent by email to full membership on September 9th, and we will link to that in our show notes. In short, after the negotiation deadline passed on August 30th, the WMU administration no longer had any clear obligation to provide the faculty with a salary raise. As Article 49 of the WMU AAUP agreement states, the administration could simply choose to implement its last official offer once negotiations continued past the August 30th deadline, subject to continued bargaining on both sides, but again had no obligation to do so. As we had previously noted, this help explains why they were so willing to drag their feet about salary raises as the deadline approached. In short, after that deadline passed, and with the administration's generally dismissive attitude to faculty concerns consistently on display, the threat loomed that the faculty might get no raise at all. Indeed, we are confident that it is only due to intense pressure from WMU AAUP members and allies that the administration has now agreed to a higher number than its previous last official offer as of August 30th. Even this higher figure is still not as high as we would like. Indeed, if the administration had felt it could get away with agreeing to no raise at all, we don't doubt that that is what they would have done. In any case, the salary increase figure in this approved tentative agreement is as follows. A total increase of 7.25%, that is 4% in 2025 through 24 through 25, and 3.25% in 25 through 26, with an additional one-time lump sum payment of $1,000 in 25 through 26. Although the WMU AAUP did not get everything we had proposed and that the faculty deserve, we have taken some strong steps forward. For one thing, some revised negotiations approaches, including the chapter's use of a healthcare analyst, has helped empower the WMU AAUP in ways that should impact future negotiations and labor relations more generally. In addition, the historically impressive turnout of members and allies at rallies, and demonstrations has sent a clear message of strength and determination that will be felt well into the future and in multiple arenas. While WMU employees have many remaining fights to reclaim and restore our university's academic heart, the energy and solidarity of the past few months will propel us forward. Following WMU AAUP procedures, the next steps regarding negotiations are as follows. The WMU AAUP will present the tentative agreements on Article 23 and 33 and will field questions from members at the October 11th all-member chapter meeting. And in the days following that meeting, the full tentative agreement will be put to a ratification vote of the full membership. So again, that is the latest update on the standoff between WMU AAUP and the administration. Looks like a sound victory was made by the union, and a big thank you to everybody out there in the wider listening area, and all the students walking around who were supporting the professors. Again, labor when it comes together can really pull out a win. I'm going to take a quick little break. We're going to play a song real quick. It's Billy Bragg. His classic, There Is Power in a Union. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. You can also find us online, and we are on YouTube. We also have a podcast you can find on most podcasting app that is Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers, your source for the music that makes you want to move your source for political revolution. We are back. This is the Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your source for political revolution. So next story we got, we're going to talk about some of our neighbors towards the east. And basically, the University of Michigan has been really heavy-handed towards their student body, who has been, expressing their frustration on a number of issues, including the genocide in Gaza and labor issues. And this is a story from LeftVoice that kind of dives a little deeper into what the administration has been doing. This is written by Ryan McCarty. It was published on October 5th. University of Michigan moves to eliminate due process for students. Over the last 2 years, the University of Michigan administration has been fiercely repressing student and worker voices on campus with a combination of police and administrative attacks. The university has conducted large-scale arrests of student protesters demanding divestment from financial ties to the Israeli military, sent campus police to the homes of graduate student union organizers as an intimidation tactic, and violently attacked the community encampment, calling for an end to the university's complicity in the genocide in Gaza. And less physically violent but no less aggressive moves, the University of Michigan has attempted to discipline the activist graduate employee organization union for their 2023 strike and their substantial fights for a living wage. And if you remember listening to the show back then, we were covering that pretty extensively. The dismantling of the large campus police apparatus and divestment from Israel by changing hiring practices for graduate student workers. The university's moves to discipline student protesters and union workers sets a clear pattern of authoritarian repression that has been developing, driven by capitalist military war profiteering and a race to the bottom austerity approach to education. In both contexts, University of Michigan has moved aggressively to silence any dissenting voices, framing them as threats to campus safety. In March, the university pushed their repression of community voices further in their draft policy against disruption, which was widely criticized by students, faculty, and alumni, as well as GEO, the lecturer employee organization which represents non tenure track faculty, the AAUP chapter representing some tenure track faculty, and the ACLU of Michigan, among others. Despite widespread criticism, the university doubled down on the legitimacy of the statement, while indicating that they would continue thinking about how the new policy would be implemented. But an important line was buried in the university's response to critics, signaling their next avenue of repression of dissenting voices. We also consider whether a revision to our long-standing policies and standards of conduct will meet our current needs. The university snuck those revisions in the summer while students and faculty were largely absent from campus. On July 18th, University of Michigan's elected Board of Regents, consisting of 6 Democrats and 2 Republicans, sidestepped the normal process of consultations with the central student government and the faculty senate and voted to adopt a new set of revisions to the university's Statement of Student Rights and Responsibilities, the document that outlines disciplinary policies for students. In its revisions to the statement, University of Michigan eliminated guarantees that an accused student could ask for an appeals panel consisting of students, faculty, and staff. Now, the Vice President for Student Affairs, a university administrator, handles all appeals. If the university were a neutral party in these hearings, this change might be less problematic. But another significant change to the statement is that now University of Michigan itself can file complaints against students, which previously complaints had to be filed by other students, faculty, or staff. In the statement's description of the hearing process, the effects of the university serving as a complainant are subtle but important. The respondent may choose to have a resolution officer or a student resolution panel arbitrate the dispute. Should the complainant disagree with the respondent's choices, an RO will arbitrate the matter. With this addition, the university gives itself the ability to forego due process if it so chooses, because, besides acting as the final arbiter in the appeals process, this change gives the university veto power if an accused student opts for a panel of peers. This veto would force the student's case into the hands of a resolution officer appointed by the university, making it both the complainant and final judge. Essentially, the university has changed its policy so that it can prosecute and punish students freely without oversight from faculty or student representative bodies. These changes are, of course, directly related to the calls for divestment from Israel's occupation of Palestine, its genocide in Gaza, and its ongoing attacks on Lebanon. They should be viewed alongside other authoritarian attacks against pro-Palestinian protesters in Michigan, including violent police attacks against students and community members at Wayne State University in Detroit, and Democratic Attorney General Dana Nessel's announcement that she will bring charges against 11 community members, including 7 felony charges against people that were in the University of Michigan encampment when it was raided by police. In the felony charges, Nessel contends that the protesters used physical force to counter police, even though video of police pepper spraying people contradicts that claim. Local police frequently turn body cameras off while surveilling the encampment, and the state has refused to make body camera footage available to local reporters who filed a Freedom of Information Act request. It is important to recognize that University of Michigan and the state government's two-pronged attack on freedom of speech on campus illustrates about the connections between personal freedoms, working class power, and anti-war activism. All three are being attacked simultaneously, all in the name of encouraging safety or avoiding disruption. As people across the country, but especially in swing states like Michigan, are warned of the disastrous potential of another Trump presidency, it is important to be aware of the ways that liberals in governments and universities are also taking the opportunity to roll back protections for protesters and workers. It is not enough to beat back one particular autocrat. We need to come together, form a broad coalition that fights against anyone who would limit our rights to protest and maintain control over our communities and workplaces. That was University of Michigan moves to eliminate due process for students. It was an article written by Ryan McCarty on LeftVoice, published on October 5th. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. or online. Sorry, or you can find us online. You can find us online at our Facebook page. We also have YouTube and the Media Cyphers Kalamazoo podcast. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers, your source for political revolution. Hello, everybody. We are back. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. So we're going to spend basically the rest of the hour talking about the anniversary of October 7th. And, um, again, if you've been listening since the beginning, I'm pretty low on spoons today. My mom passed a week ago today. So I'm not going to have much analysis or, break down that. I mean, these articles are pretty beautifully written in their own right. So, um, one thing that I was thinking about going into this show today, we're looking at an official death toll in Gaza, something around for almost 42,000 people. Um, Although that is a severe undercount. If you throw in malnutrition, disease, conditions brought on the conflict, it's closer to 186,000 people. So, I think about, how shocking it was to lose my mom. Um, but she was older. It was, natural causes, more or less. And imagine, I was trying to imagine, multiply that by almost 200,000. And we've been covering this tragedy for a year now. And it every time I come on the show and talk about the latest human rights travesty in that part of the world, again it hits me. It's the empathy that hits us all, but there's something that hits a little different this week when I'm dealing with the death of my mother, and made me really it's made it very real because for the last year, close to 200,000 people have lost their mother or their brother or their father or their entire family. A lot of them a lot less emotionally equipped to deal with that death than I was last week. The everyone's least favorite acronym, child no surviving family. It's coming after all the bombing from the IDF. So dealing with my own grief, my mother, and thinking through kind of I feel like obligated to come on and talk about these issues with the community. Um, it makes it all very real, and it just makes me feel so angry just all over again that we are paying for this carnage. That the tax money that is taken out of my work check is being used to deprive other people of their mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and so on and so forth. Um, so with that in mind, why don't we start? There's a couple articles that approach what is going on from different angles. There's this. I'm going to start with the Truth Out, which is kind of commenting on the anniversary, and then there's a good article from the Intercept talking about the way the media has kind of been covering sort of last year, and then the third article is kind of going to be more of an update about what is going on right now, particularly in the way tensions have, everything is being escalated over there, and the Biden administration is basically just helping along and going along with it. So we'll start with the Truth Out piece here. This is written by, excuse me, Michael Moshebek. This is published on October 7th. A single day of genocide would be too much. What then when it lasts a year? Today is a difficult day. Israel's U.S. sponsored war on Gaza has been relentlessly raging on for a whole year, with no end in sight. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas and other resistance fighters broke through their open-air prison wall and launched a massive assault that killed 1,140 Israelis. They also took 250 hostages, of whom 101 remain in custody awaiting an elusive ceasefire and hostage deal that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has continuously thwarted and refuses to conclude. Since then, Israel's genocidal assault over the past 12 months on Gaza has killed more than 41,638 Palestinians, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, with 16,859 of those being children. The Lancet, a respected British medical journal, calculated that the real death toll, including those missing under the rubble and indirect deaths from malnutrition, disease, and other conditions brought on by the conflict, could be around 186,000 people. Healthcare workers who have visited Gaza have repeatedly said the real number of deaths is likely far higher than the official count. Over 100,000 Palestinians have been injured. At least 280 humanitarian aid workers, nearly 500 healthcare workers, and 130 journalists have been killed. 399 schools have been destroyed. All 12 universities in Gaza have been flattened. 31 out of 36 hospitals in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, and countless children have died from malnutrition, diseases, or lack of medical help. In the West Bank, Israeli occupation forces have devastated civilian infrastructure with D9 bulldozers, armored personnel carriers, and armored jeeps in Jenin, Nablus, Tulkarem, and other towns as a form of collective punishment. And armed Israeli settlers continue to ravage villages and terrorize Palestinians in an effort to drive them out of their homeland. Since October 7th, 2023, according to the Health Ministry, the death toll in the West Bank is 650. According to the Prisoners' Health Authority, the Prisoners Club, and the Adamir Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association, more than 9,000 Palestinian detainees are languishing in Israeli jails. Last month, Israel fully expanded its war into Lebanon. Advisors in the Biden-Harris administration reportedly encouraged Israel to pursue this escalation, risking a wider regional war with even more devastating consequences. Israel's ferocious bombing campaign in Lebanon has rained death and destruction on innocent civilians. It has so far displaced over 1 million people, maimed and wounded thousands of people, and killed more than 2,000 people. France's President Emmanuel Macron called for a halt of weapons deliveries to Israel, which triggered an angry response from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A statement issued by his office said, as Israel fights the forces of barbarism led by Iran, all civilized countries should be standing firmly by Israel's side. Yet President Macron and other Western leaders are now calling for arms embargoes against Israel. At present, there are more than 40,000 U.S. troops stationed in the Middle East. In August, the U.S. Department of Defense said more defensive military capabilities were deployed to the Middle East to bolster force protection for U.S. troops in the region and to defend Israel. The Biden administration announced even more troops would head to the Middle East again later in September, as Israel prepared for its ground invasion of Lebanon, in addition to bombing Syria and Yemen. When will this nightmare end? When will the unimaginable suffering being inflicted every minute of every day on the Palestinian and Lebanese people come to an end? And how did the world descend into such an abyss where the killing of innocent civilians has become the new normal? My thoughts are with Palestine and Lebanon, every breath and every heartbeat. In the face of an unrelenting military aggression that has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon, telling that story becomes a need. And again, going forward in the article, this is going to be autobiographical. Again, this was written by Michael Mushabek, and they're talking about their experience as a descendant of Palestinian parents. I am a descendant of Palestinian parents, Nakba survivors who were displaced from their homeland and made refugees in 1948. I was born and grew up in Lebanon. I have family and friends in Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, as well as in Beirut and southern Lebanon. Some have recently been killed by Israel's indiscriminate bombardment of residential neighborhoods, and many have been displaced from their homes and are now in danger of being killed by Israeli bombs, airstrikes, or starvation. I've known and witnessed Israeli aggression and terror throughout my teenage life, long before Hamas or Hezbollah were established. So when U.S. government talking heads and U.S. corporate media tell you that the devastation Israel has wrought is all because of October 7th, I beg you to think again. Unlike the framing put forth by our political leaders and mainstream media outlets, a framing that refuses to provide any meaningful context and instead cover up and conceal the truth in the service of war profiteers, it is not complicated, as they would have you believe. It is not an age old religious view, and it is not a conflict by extremists on both sides. Israel is a settler colonial, nuclear armed regional power backed diplomatically, politically, militarily, and economically by the United States. It is waging war against an indigenous people's struggle for freedom, equality, and an end to occupation. A war against such a cause is not one that can be defeated through military might. Palestinians in the occupied territories and in the diaspora, with the global support of people of conscience, are determined to continue their struggle until liberation. What we are seeing in Lebanon today is what we have been seeing live streamed from Gaza over the last 12 months and what Palestinians have endured over the past 76 years. Do not be fooled. Israel is not defending itself. It is defending its occupation and is now attempting to renew one in southern Lebanon. Netanyahu and his extremist allies are using the pretext of the October 7th Hamas attack to fundamentally reshape Gaza and ethnically cleanse it of Palestinians. The coming weeks and months will show us if Israel has similar designs for southern Lebanon. History has shown how Palestinian Lebanese people might resist such a threat. The resistance movement Hamas, whose former leader Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated by Israel in July during a visit to Tehran, was established in 1987 among the first Intifada as a direct result of the brutality of Israeli occupation, oppression, and its regime of apartheid. It was born out of Palestinian hopelessness, desperation, and years of false promises from Israel and the United States. Israeli military assaults have only served to deepen resentment among the Palestinian civilian population, who bear the brunt of the attacks and drive recruitment for the resistance. Israel's 17-year total siege of Gaza only bolstered Palestinians' resolve to fight back and end the blockade and suffering of 2.2 million residents of Gaza, nearly 70% of whom only live in the Strip because they were displaced from their homes in 1948 and 1967. Hezbollah was established after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, which included the horrific Sabra and Shatila massacre of thousands of women and children, in order to defend Lebanon from future Israeli attacks. Israel has assassinated Hezbollah leaders before. In 1992, it killed then Secretary General Abbas al-Musawi. Israel has also occupied southern Lebanon before, from 1982 until the year 2000, when the Lebanese resistance drove the Israeli occupation forces out of the south in defeat. In 2006, Israel invaded Lebanon again, killing scores of people before it was pushed out by Hezbollah fighters. On September 27th, Israel assassinated Saeed Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's secretary general, in a carpet bombing attack using 2,000-pound U.S.-made bombs that leveled an entire neighborhood in Beirut's southern Dahia district. Israel's ground invasion of Lebanon that began soon afterwards is employing the same lethal tactics it unleashed on the people of Gaza this past year. Speaking on Israeli TV last week, the country's education minister called for Lebanon to be destroyed in its entirety. There's no difference between Hezbollah and Lebanon. Lebanon will be annihilated. It will cease to exist, said Yoav Kish. Lebanon has of late faced political paralysis and one financial crisis after another. Its hospitals and medical facilities are finding it difficult to cope with the magnitude of Israel's latest assault. Like the Palestinians in Gaza, the Lebanese have nowhere to go. On September 22nd, the Times of Israel reported that Netanyahu told Israeli lawmakers he is considering the so-called General's Plan. That plan was presented by retired Major General Goira Eiland to lay total siege to northern Gaza and expel all its Palestinian residents. Eiland, the former director of the National Security Council and former head of the planning department of the Israeli military, said, "We have to tell the residents of North Gaza that they have 1 week to evacuate the territory, which then becomes a military zone. a zone in which every figure is a target and, more importantly, no supplies enter the territory. Israel's unlawful occupation of Palestine and its continuous theft of Palestinian lands, as well as occupation of parts of Lebanon and the annexation of Syria's Golan Heights, are the root causes of the so-called conflict in the Middle East. There will be no end to the violence in the region until Israel ends its siege on Gaza and its illegal occupation, as demanded by the United States, the ruling of the International Court of Justice, and a vast majority of countries in the world. In a UN General Assembly vote on September 18th, 124 countries, more than two-thirds of the world, supported a resolution demanding Israel's military end its illegal occupation and withdraw from the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. It affirmed the ICJ's finding that the state of Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful, and that Israel is under an obligation to bring to an end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible. The resolution also orders Israel to dismantle the illegal settlements and return the land to the Palestinians, as well as giving reparations. Demands an end to its system of apartheid within 12 months and the delivery of a report from the UN Secretary General within 3 months' time on the implementation of the resolution. There is no doubt that this will be ignored by Israel, but the significance of the UNGA resolution, the ICJ findings, the recognition of the state of Palestine by 146 UN member countries, the isolation of Israel and the US, and the extensive reports of human rights organizations that detail Israeli apartheid, and the unprecedented and growing global movement and solidarity with Palestinians, especially among the younger generation, may usher in a new period of transformative changes in the struggle for Palestinian rights. The sheer cruelty of Israel's assault on Gaza and its forced intentional starvation campaign and blockage of hundreds of trucks of food and aid from reaching the people has sparked protests and encampments on university campuses in the U.S. around the world. Students, including the majority of young American Jews, are no longer looking away and are demanding that the institutions divest from companies that profit from Israel's apartheid and genocide. Despite the brutal crackdown by riot police and the numerous arrests of protesters on U.S. campuses, the fearless students are inspiring others around the world and are teaching their college administrators a lesson about freedom of expression and the right to protest, a lesson that should be taught on university campuses by those who are attempting to silence the students and criminalize their dissent. As President Joe Biden approaches his final months in office, changes in his administration's reckless foreign policy decisions regarding Israel and the rest of the Middle East are unlikely. No one should expect a ceasefire and hostage release deal in Gaza, despite all the promises and statements about how both Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are working tirelessly and around the clock to stop the carnage. Over and over again, we've heard their insincere rhetorical support of a two-state solution, but their unconditional support of Israel and the billions in arms deals to Israel makes that impossible. It is helping Israel displace Palestinians and grab more land in order to achieve its endgame of the out-of-state solution, emptying Gaza of Palestinians and continuing its ethnic cleansing of the West Bank and East Jerusalem in order to realize its ultimate goal of a Jewish ethno-state. Despite a year of protests, student arrests, and encampments, massive rallies and calls for a ceasefire and arms embargo, the Biden-Harris administration has chosen to ignore the demands of the vast majority of Americans and maintain its complicity in and support of Israel's war crimes and human rights violations. It does so despite the fact that it knows all too well that an arms embargo is the only way to end Israel's aggressions in Palestine and Lebanon. Without U.S. military assistance and the U.S.'s endless supply of weapons, and no doubt its intelligence and surveillance capabilities, Israel would not be in a position to sustain its attacks on multiple fronts. After facing no red line in Gaza or the West Bank over the past year, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has been emboldened to expand his violent campaign in Lebanon. Supplying Israel with weapons of mass destruction, including 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs that incinerate civilians, level apartment buildings, and raze entire neighborhoods to the ground in violation of both U.S. and international law, and shielding Israel from accountability with its UN veto power, makes the genocide in Gaza and the war on Lebanon as much a U.S. war as it is an Israeli one. ProPublica revealed on September 24th that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken knew that the Israeli government had deliberately blocked humanitarian aid to Gaza, but lied about it to Congress. Experts from multiple state agencies shared plentiful evidence about Israel's actions and called for a pause on arms transfers in order to comply with U.S. law, which mandates cutting off weapons to governments that block U.S. humanitarian assistance. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin vowed in September that the U.S. would continue arming Israel. And concluding a deal that gives Israel $8.7 billion in military aid, he said, "We've been committed from the very beginning to help Israel provide the things that are necessary for them to be able to protect their sovereign territory, and that hasn't changed and won't change in the future." We live in a world where military power is king, and the UN, the world body that is expected to keep world peace, has become an ineffective chamber where representatives from around the world meet and pass resolutions only to find them vetoed by the US and other great powers, as in the case with Israel's genocidal practices in Gaza, its illegal settlements, and its unlawful occupation of Palestinian lands. The future we are being shown through the window of Gaza and now Lebanon is bleak. Gaza asks us all a vital question about what kind of future we want for ourselves and for our children and grandchildren, and whether we will fight for it. We are being asked whether to accept what is happening, the endless wars, the horror, the lies, the injustice, the loss, the unspeakable suffering, and the end game of 76 years of terror in Palestine. Gaza is offering us a moment to determine that future. Do we speak up and stand together for change, or will we let Israel and the U.S. slide the world into the abyss of hatred and endless wars? That was Michel Mouchabek from Truth Out. A single day of genocide would be too much. What then when it lasts a year? We will stay on this topic. We're going to take just a quick little break. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. You can find us online at Facebook, our YouTube, or Media Cyphers Kalamazoo podcast. You can find that on most podcasting apps. Hello, everybody. We are back. This is Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. This next story, again, we're staying on this topic. It's been a year since October 7th, and there's this great article from The Intercept. You know, the name of the show is Media Cyphers, so a lot of what we do is call out the mainstream corporate media for how it frames things, especially in the context of this, where, it really is carrying water for U.S. imperialism. So this article is titled U.S. Media's Doublespeak. Israelis lived in densely populated areas. Palestinians are human shields. And basically, it's talking about the disparity between how Israel talks about Palestinians and Palestinian combatants versus how they operate domestically, the IDF, that is, with their buildings being in proximity to civilian areas in particular. So this is from Ahmed Wahidi, published on October 4th. On Tuesday night, CNN reported that Israeli civilians in parts of Tel Aviv were in the potential line of fire from an Iranian missile attack aimed at the headquarters of Mossad, the Israeli state intelligence agency. The cable network described Mossad's central location as a densely populated area, a civilian area in which a key asset of the Israeli state military is embedded. One phrase was conspicuously missing from CNN's coverage, a term I grew up hearing in Gaza: human shields. For decades, Israel has attributed the vast number of civilian deaths in Gaza by alleging that Hamas decided to locate itself within civilian infrastructure. The huge numbers of Palestinians killed by Israeli bullets and bombs were, according to the narrative, not Israel's victims. Instead, they were Hamas's human shields. The label arose because of the proximity of these civilian casualties' homes and workplaces to sites of Hamas operations in, to borrow CNN's words, densely populated areas. The Western media's double standards when it comes to Israel and Palestine are hardly new. The discourse around human shields, or the failure to use the term, is an example of hypocrisy pushed to the extreme. Earlier this year, several of CNN's own staff complained of a systemic and institutional bias within the network toward Israel. Just last week, CNN reported that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Hezbollah of using its civilians as human shields for years. CNN did not, meanwhile, describe Israel as also using its civilians as human shields around Mossad's headquarters. The different language for different people came as no surprise to me. As a Palestinian journalist from Gaza, I grew up with these poisonous narratives. Palestinians are portrayed as terrorists who allow Hamas to hide among them. The toll of this narrative can be counted in Palestinian and, more recently, Lebanese lives. It allowed Israel a free hand to kill civilians. In the current Gaza genocide, well over 40,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel, most of them women and children. It is a toll I am far too familiar with. My mother, who worked at the United Nations, and my sister, who was a physiotherapist, were killed in the war. Neither was any more of a human shield than the residents of Tel Aviv. They were civilians killed by Israel. The first time I heard the expression human shields, however, was not in reference to Hamas. For as long as I can remember, Israeli soldiers were the ones employing the tactic of using humans as shields, Palestinian humans. In 2014, during the Israeli ground invasion of Kahuza, near the southern Gaza town of Khan Yunis, news emerged of Israeli forces trapping a Palestinian family in the area and forcing their 16-year-old son, Ahmad Ubu Rida, to step outside the house at gunpoint. Abu Rida was kidnapped and used as a human shield by Israeli soldiers for 5 days to search for alleged Hamas tunnels. Following his release, Abu Rida said the Israeli soldiers also abused him both psychologically and physically. I was a 10-year-old child at the time, shaken by the thought that I too might endure the horrifying experience that Abu Rida went through. As the years passed, Israeli forces continued the same inhumane acts, with more persecution and degradation in the West Bank, with cover from the framing of the media and in turn acquiescence of the US government. Though the use of involuntary human shields has been a war crime under the Geneva Convention since 1949, this dynamic is not new. The US media has a long history of accusing America's ideological foes of using civilians as human shields. In 1967, the Associated Press reportedly described the Viet Cong as using children as human shields. President George W. Bush highlighted Saddam Hussein's use of civilians as human shields to justify his Iraq war. Now, as Israel's leaders and military treat the entire Gaza Strip and its residents as a human shield, including every hospital, school, and refugee camp, the meaning of the phrase human shield under international law is perverted beyond recognition. For Palestinians, the term goes further than a mere description of our bodies on Israel's front lines. It reduces our existence to that of subhumans, treating our lives as worthless, as objects and war tools. CNN did not, of course, vehemently denounce Israel's use of civilians as human shields when it noted Mossad's civilian-dense location, because for CNN, like almost every Western media outlet, Israelis, unlike Palestinians, get to be human. That was from The Intercept, written by Ahmad Wahidi. U.S. media's doublespeak. Israelis live in densely populated areas. Palestinians are human shields. I've got one more article on this topic I wanted to share. This comes to us from Common Dreams. And it is an article about kind of giving an update on how the Biden administration is addressing the new tensions that Israel has foisted upon the Middle East and the region. Excuse me. So this is an article. This is written by Paul Pillar from Institute for Responsible Statecraft, published on Common Dreams. Headline is Biden allowing Israel to march U.S. into war with Iran. By cooperating with Israel in a new attack, the United States is assisting a state that has been responsible for much of the escalation and the vast majority of death and destruction in the Middle East for at least the past year. The Biden administration is not only endorsing, but also on the verge of actively assisting a new Israeli armed attack on Iran. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the United States is working directly with Israel regarding such an attack. The United States is fully supportive of Israel, declares President Joe Biden. The projected attack serves no U.S. interests. The attack perpetuates a broader pattern of escalating violence in the Middle East that also serves no U.S. interests. The Iranian missile salvo, to which the coming Israeli attack is ostensible retaliation, was itself retaliation for previous Israeli attacks. Retaliation for retaliation is a prescription for an unending cycle of violence. The United States is facilitating attack on a nation that does not want war and has been remarkably restrained in trying to avoid it, in the face of repeated Israeli provocations. A sustained Israeli bombing campaign against Iranian related targets within Syria elicited a response only when it escalated to an attack on a diplomatic compound in Damascus, killing senior Iranian officials. Even then, the Iranian response, in the form of an earlier salvo of missiles and drones in April, was designed and telegraphed in a way to make a show of defiance, but with most of the projectiles certain to be shot down, to cause minimal damage and almost no casualties. When Israel assassinated visiting Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in a government guest house in Tehran in July, sort of attack that would elicit a quick and forcible response by the U.S. or Israel if it happened in one of their capitals, Iran did nothing until last week. It finally acted only after yet another Israeli attack, this time an assault on residential buildings in the suburb of Beirut that killed a senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard officer along with Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah. Far from being motivated by any grandiose ambitions of regional dominance or desire to destabilize the region, Iranian leaders believed that they were getting killed by 1,000 cuts from Israel and that they had to respond to the repeated Israeli attacks lest they lose the confidence not only of their own people but of regional allies. The missile firings that constituted Iran's retaliation, like the ones in April, again caused minimal damage or casualties. By cooperating with Israel in a new attack, the United States is assisting a state that has been responsible for most of the escalation and the vast majority of death and destruction in the Middle East for at least the past year. Although Hamas's attack on southern Israel last October is commonly seen as the starting point of the subsequent mayhem in the Middle East, the question of who is responding to whom could go back further than that. For example, the 1,200 deaths from the Hamas attack, horrible to be sure, were fewer than the number of Palestinians that Israel had killed in the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip just from the day-to-day operations of the occupying Israeli army, supplemented by settler violence in the West Bank during the previous 8 years. Since the Hamas attack, the devastating Israeli operation in the Gaza Strip has gone far beyond anything that can be construed as defense or even as a response to Hamas, and has brought suffering to innocent civilians that is orders of magnitude greater than anything Hamas or any other Palestinian group has ever done. The still rising official death toll exceeds 41,000, with the actual number of Palestinian deaths probably much higher and likely into six figures. Much of the strip has been reduced to rubble and rendered unlivable. After Hezbollah fired rounds into Israel last October in a show of support for the Palestinians in Gaza, the story of conflict among the Israeli-Lebanese frontier has mainly been one of repeated Israeli escalations. Israeli attacks in Lebanon have far exceeded Hezbollah attacks on Israel, in number but especially in physical effects, with almost no casualties within Israel apart from a few military personnel at the border. The rapidly rising toll of deaths in Lebanon from Israeli attacks has now passed 2,000, with about 10,000 injured and about 1.2 million people displaced from their homes. As in the Gaza Strip, civilians constitute much and perhaps most of that toll, including as a result of Israeli airstrikes that have been demolished residential buildings in densely populated neighborhoods. As a growing Israeli ground assault Lebanon accompanies the aerial bombardment, Israel has told people in almost the entire southern third of Lebanon to move north, even though Israel already has been conducting lethal aerial attacks throughout Lebanon, including as far north as Tripoli. This also is reminiscent of the pattern in Gaza, in which residents are told to move, only to be bombed again in their new location. The offensive Israeli actions that figured in the confrontation with Iran, including the aerial and clandestine assassination operations in Lebanon, Syria, and the heart of Tehran, also have each constituted escalation. These operations appear designed at least in part to goad Iran into entering a wider war, preferably one that also involves the United States. Other motives behind the Israeli escalation are multiple and vary with a specific target. The deadly assaults on the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and increasingly also in the West Bank are part of a long term effort to use force that somehow make Israel's Palestinian problems go away through a combination of outright killing, including exile, then making a homeland unlivable, and intimidation of any who may. Israel's official declared objective for its attacks in Lebanon is to permit a return home of the 70,000 temporarily displaced residents of northern Israel, whose numbers constitute less than 6% of the Lebanese who have been driven from their homes so far by the Israel offensive. The objective is genuine, but an escalating war along Israel's northern border only places the objective further out of reach. The Israeli operations also clearly are designed to cripple Hezbollah as part or as much as possible, although they sustain and heighten the sort of anger that led to Hezbollah's establishment and growth in the first place. In Israel, that is the strongest military power in the Middle East and is throwing its armed might around in seemingly every direction but the Mediterranean Sea, is a nation drunk on the use of force and stumbling in still more use of it with little or no apparent attention to any long term strategy for achieving an end state, other than living forever by the sword. Each tactical success, including the killing of a prominent adversary such as Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah, only seems to deepen the inebriation. Beyond this, one gets into a mixture of motivations that are specific to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and one shared with other Israeli policymakers. It is widely recognized, including by Netanyahu's domestic opponents, that he's a personal stake in continuing and even escalating Israel's wars. This is partly because of the usual rally round the flag effect that attenuates the political problems of a wartime leader. It is also more specifically because Netanyahu is dependent on the support of the most extreme members of his right wing ruling coalition to hold that coalition together, thereby keeping Netanyahu in power and delaying the day he has to confront fully the corruption charges against him. An armed attack on Iran would extend the Israeli policy, not unique to Netanyahu, although he has been its most prominent exponent of stoking military hostility toward and isolation of Iran. That policy serves to weaken a rival for regional influence, to place blame for everything wrong with the region on someone other than Israel, to inhabit any engagement with Israel by Israel's patron, the United States, and to divert international attention away from Israel's own actions. Diversion seems to work. The international attention to what may come next in the confrontation with Iran, in addition to the escalating operations in Lebanon, has meant less attention than would otherwise have been given in newspapers and the airwaves to the continued carnage in the Gaza Strips that claims civilian lives, such as Israeli attacks within the last few days on a girls' school and an orphanage that several hundred displaced persons were using as shelter. The U.S. presidential election provides another motivation for the Israeli government to escalate regional warfare. Netanyahu certainly would like to see the second term of Donald Trump, who gave Israel just about anything it wanted during his previous term in office, with nothing in return except political support for Trump. This relationship is part of a broader political alliance between the Republican Party and Netanyahu's Likud party. To the extent an escalatory mess in the Middle East causes problems for the Biden administration and thereby hurts the election chances of Vice President Kamala Harris, that is a bonus from Netanyahu's point of view. Netanyahu is more likely to enjoy that bonus and the other fruits of ramping up conflict with Iran to the extent that the United States gets directly involved in that conflict. Such involvement not only makes the politically costly mess for the Biden administration all the messier, but also enables Netanyahu to claim credibly that he has the United States fully at his side in his government's lethal activities. None of these Israeli objectives are in the interest of the United States. Several of the objectives, such as hamstringing any U.S. diplomacy that involves Iran, are directly and manifestly opposed to U.S. interests. Israel's regional warfare, and more specifically a U.S.-backed attack on Iran, would harm U.S. interests in several additional ways. Closer association with Israel's lethal operations increases the chance of reprisals, including terrorist reprisals. It also worsens U.S. isolation in international politics. Supporting or participating in an Israeli attack on Iran would further undermine U.S. claims to be in favor of peace and observance of a rules-based international order. It would mean attacking the country that, in this confrontation, has exercised restraint in the interest of avoiding war and is firmly in support of ceasefires on each of the fronts seeing combat. It would mean aiding further attacks by the country that, in the same confrontation, has inflicted far more death and destruction and done more to promote escalation of the violence than any other in the region. An attack on Iran would roil the oil market and cause economic dislocations that would reach the United States, especially but not solely if such an attack targeted Iranian oil facilities. An attack would set back any chance for fruitful diplomacy involving Iran on matters such as security in the Persian Gulf region. An attack would increase the chance that the Iranian regime would choose to develop a nuclear weapon. Nothing would be better designed to strengthen the arguments of those in Tehran willing to take that step than armed attacks demonstrating that Iran does not now have a sufficient deterrent. Israel has always entrapped the United States to a large degree in its lethal ways in the Middle East, and the entrapment threatens to become deeper with the anticipated new attack on Iran. The entrapment would not have been possible without mismanagement of the U.S.-Israeli relationship on the Washington end. President Biden's President Biden's approach of holding Netanyahu close in the hopes of influencing his policies has failed. It has also been counterproductive. In the absence of any willingness to employ the leverage that U.S. material aid to Israel represents, all the bear hugging and expressions of support have only reassured Netanyahu that he can continue to prosecute his wars and ignored American calls for restraint without losing that aid. It's refreshing to see reports that, at least within the Department of Defense, there is some recognition that the policy has been counterproductive by emboldening Israel to escalate. It is perhaps unsurprising that the department, whose personnel would be on the front line of an expanded warfare involving the United States, is more willing than others to recognize the nature and sources of the violence plaguing the Middle East and the need to deter or restrain Israel rather than embolden it. One can only hope that this willingness will spread more widely in policymaking circles. That was Paul Pillar from the Institute for Responsible Statecraft. That was an article published on Common Dreams. Biden allowing Israel to march U.S. into war with Iran. We're going to take a quick little break, come back. I'm going to pivot to a domestic issue real quick here, a couple domestic stories. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your source for political revolution. Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all have been listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. So I'm going to cover one more story, and then I think we're going to wrap up a little early. Electropop therapy will be on at 2 p.m. as usual. I just need a little bit of a lunch break here. Anyway, this is an article from Common Dreams, written by Jake Johnson. It was published earlier today, talking about Hurricane Milton and basically the connection between climate change, these massive hurricanes that are happening in October, which is not normal, everybody, especially younger folks. But this is an article from Common Dreams. Ocean heat fueling Hurricane Milton was made up to 800 times more likely by the climate crisis. As Floridians race to prepare for and escape the path of Hurricane Milton, an analysis published Monday showed that high sea surface temperatures fueling the monstrous storm's rapid intensification were made between 400 and 800 times more likely by the climate crisis. Research organization Climate Central noted that Milton, which is expected to make landfall in the populous Tampa Bay metropolitan area on Wednesday night, is a historically powerful storm that has undergone extreme rapid intensification over sea surface temperatures warmed by climate change. Sea surface temperatures in the area where Milton has developed are at or above record-breaking highs, Climate Central observed. Conditions that have allowed the storm to quickly become what the U.S. National Hurricane Center described as an extremely serious threat to Florida, a state still reeling from the destructive Hurricane Helen. Climate change clearly warmed the Gulf waters that fueled Milton's development, likely supercharging its rapid intensification and making this hurricane much more dangerous, said Daniel Guilford, a meteorologist at Climate Central. Fossil fuel pollution is amplifying this threat. As New York Times climate reporters Raymond Zong and Mira Rojana Sakul explained Monday, for a year and a half now, the upper layer of the world's oceans have been at or near its hottest temperatures on record. The seas absorb most of the extra heat that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases trap near Earth's surface, the pair wrote. So the same human caused forces that have been bringing abnormal heat to towns, cities, and landscapes are helping to warm the oceans. Milton exploded from a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane in just over 24 hours. Intensification that scientists Jeff Masters and Bob Henson called a spectacular and ominous feat. The storm has since weakened slightly to a Category 4 as it moves across the Gulf of Mexico, but is still expected to be devastating. It is very likely that Milton will be a highly destructive hurricane costing over $10 billion for Florida, and Milton could end up placing among the costliest U.S. hurricanes on record, depending on the eventual details of landfall, they wrote Monday. The risk is also high that Milton will be very deadly if people in low-lying areas do not heed evacuation orders and flee the hurricane. Many Florida counties are under voluntary or mandatory evacuation orders as Milton barrels toward the state just days after Helene ripped through the region, wreaking deadly havoc across 6 states. Some of the same communities ravaged by Helene are now facing this new threat. Millions of Floridians may be asked to evacuate, the American Red Cross said in a statement. Helene and Milton are both examples of how extreme weather is becoming more frequent and intense. In this case, meteorologists say Helene's intense and far-reaching rainfall, which extended hundreds of miles from the coast, can be attributed to the climate crisis. And Milton is already the third fastest rapidly intensifying storm on record in the Atlantic, according to more than 40 years of data from the National Hurricane Center. The Associated Press noted late Monday that as evacuation orders were issued, forecasters warned of a possible 8 to 12-foot storm surge in Tampa Bay. That's the highest ever predicted for the region and nearly double the levels reached 2 weeks ago during Helene, Associated Press reported, citing a spokesperson from the NHC. That was ocean heat fueling Hurricane Milton was made up to 800 times more likely by climate crisis. That was written by Jake Johnson, published earlier today. We're going to close the show a little bit early. Electropop Therapy will be on at 2 o'clock. We will be doing a special. I'm DJ Danger Groove. I also do the music show after this, and I'm going to be doing a special episode dedicated to my mother, who passed away 1 week ago today. Rest in power to her. Y'all been listening to Media Cyphers, your source for political revolution. Until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.